Let me get the screen share set up. Perfect. Can everybody see that okay? Can you let me know in the chat if there's any problems? All right, perfect. And then the inevitable moving things around the window to be able to see everything. Okay. So hi, everybody, and thank you for coming to our presentation. I'm Elizabeth Nelson, and I'm a reference and instruction librarian at Penn State's Lehigh Valley campus, which is near Allentown, PA. And I'm our campus's library liaison for our business courses, among other areas. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your teaching experience?
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. I've been speaking for the last 3 years. I've been teaching it for the last 3 years at Penn State Lehigh Valley in the supply chain and project management area. Prior to that, I was an adjunct at many universities. However, my core responsibility has been in supply chain in business. So I've worked with companies like Pfizer and Merck and other companies, and working with Elizabeth has been a great opportunity for me to extend my teaching experience and knowledge and then share with the students. And that's what we're going to share today.
Awesome, thank you. And like Mark said, and like Teresa said, we're here to talk to you today about how we co-designed a research guide and accompanying assignments to help business students understand and contextualize the value of their research skills in both the classroom and in their future careers. So, okay, so to go over a little bit of an overview of what we're going to talk about, we're going to start out by quickly going over the research guide and sort of how it came to be. And I'm going to go ahead and drop the link to the guide, excuse me, into the chat now. So if you want to check it out and look around while we're talking, please feel free. And then we're going to talk about the impact the research guide and its paired assignments have had on our students' engagement and learning, especially in those career applicable ways. And finally, we're going to close out with our plans for the future and some time for Q&A. If you do have questions kind of throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop those in the chat whenever they occur to you. Mark and I are going to be watching the chat, and if there are questions that we can address quickly or that we need to address in that moment, we can definitely do that. But regardless, it kind of gives us a heads up of what you're thinking about so that we know what might come up in the Q&A and also what we might want to address as we go through the presentation. So with that in mind, let's start out with the research guide that we created. And again, the link to that guide is in the chat if you want to open that up. So the goal for this research guide project was initially to create a one-stop resource that students would use throughout not just one supply chain management class, but the entire supply chain management curriculum as it's taught at our campus. This was meant to be what we're thinking of as an overarching resource. Students are introduced to it in their early SCM classes, but with each new class, they'll hopefully be using the resources that are becoming, more and more familiar over time in different ways as their understanding of the field grows and their information needs change. Throughout the design process, we really tried to keep our approach very student-centric. Specifically, we wanted to create something that was going to be easy for them to use and not intimidating. We wanted to try to counteract that fear that students sometimes have or dislike of the idea of research assignments. But we still wanted a resource that would reward critical thinking and strategic approaches to research. Ideally, our primary goal was to try to inspire our SCM students to become curious learners in this field, to encounter resources that interest them, to explore those resources without hesitation or fear or anxiety, and to be able to see the value of using those resources and maybe one day contributing to them in their professional lives. This is an approach that generally fits in really well with the rest of our campus's library or campus libraries engagement and instruction strategies. And this specific model, this course guide model, is one that I'm hoping to expand to a couple other courses and disciplines. Mark and I are working to create a project management guide this summer that might be independent, might be part of this guide, might change the nature of this guide. We'll see how that goes. And I'm also working with one of our corporate communication faculty members to start up a similar project for her courses, as she has students with the same kind of mindset about their careers and their career skills that our SCM and our business students have. We started the guide project to create the original SCM guide in 2020. So part of the project was definitely motivated by that time and by looking for ways to help our students stay connected and keep on top of their research resources and keep building those research skills during remote learning, and especially during those early couple months of the pandemic when it was so difficult for anybody to really be able to focus on anything. So we really wanted a resource that was going to feel very natural, very intuitive, that wasn't going to need a lot of guidance, and that would reward them for exploring and critiquing it. Unfortunately, the first attempt at the guide wound up being a 38-page Google slide deck. So we fell a little bit short of the mark on that intuitive and easy to use goal in the beginning. But luckily, Mark has a great rapport with his students every semester, and we've been able to use that to solicit some fantastic student feedback. We give out surveys, we have discussions with them about how they use the guide, and they've been very engaged in those discussions. And we can go beyond what we might normally talk about in a one-shot library instruction session by kind of having that throughout the course. And that feedback continues to help us make the guide better from the student's perspective, and really make them feel involved in the process of creating this thing that they and their peers are going to use. For example, we do have LibGuides at Penn State. That would definitely be the most familiar platform for librarians. And we do have guides on this subject within the Penn State University libraries. But for this project, for this course, we wanted to try something that would be really easy for students to find. They wouldn't have to navigate an unfamiliar website to be able to get to it. We did give up the ability to integrate it straight into their Canvas, the way our LibGuides can be integrated, but we can link the guide directly in, so they can reach it through there as well. But we wanted something too that would be able, or would be easy for them to access and save and find after graduation as well. So let's say if the library website changes in 5 years, those graduates would still be able to find this guide a little bit more easily if it was in Google or in Google Slides, or if they could save a copy of it. And then we wound up switching to Google Sites because that was much easier for students to navigate and use than those, hard to read kind of Google slide deck setup. So that's kind of an overview of what the guide is and how we developed it. Again, we're kind of flying through that a little bit because we want to talk a lot about the implementation of the guide and the impact that it's had, but we're happy to come back and give more details on any of this in the Q&A if you have questions about it. So I wanted to go over how we implement the guide in class, how we use it with our course assignments. Mark is going to give us a lot more detail on these assignments, how we use the guide, how he pairs it with the assignments in a moment. I'm just going to start us off with a very quick rundown of kind of an introduction of the different assignments that we're going to be discussing. So first, the class has a pre-assignment, which asks students to kind of in the background of the course, use the career readiness section of the guide to explore job opportunities, reflect on what they might like to do, like as a profession, and then reflect on what skills they have or lack for those jobs that they've highlighted, and make some plans for what they might need to do to improve or create their resumes and become a good candidate for the jobs that they've picked out. And all that is supported by Mark commenting on revisions to their CV in response to the jobs they're targeting, and kind of reinforcing and making sure that they are including the skills that they're learning throughout the semester in those kind of job application sort of documentation or documents. The biggest use of the guide is definitely the weekly papers. They're similar to like current event papers in which students would choose a topic from the course or a current event within SEM, and then find an article or a resource discussing that outside of the course materials. And then in their short paper, they reflect on what they learned from that source in regards to that topic. These papers are definitely the most adaptable assignments too. They ask students to use anything from research articles to blog posts to podcasts to webinars to professional conference websites. And they're really, this is the kind of the biggest integration with the course guide because we really wanted to give students an opportunity to interact with a variety of different kind of information sources that they might come into contact with as professionals. The course's exams themselves also use a lot of problem-based learning and feature problems that require research and cited examples, as well as just a kind of immediate application of knowledge. And then the last two projects, one of Mark's SCM courses assigns a company project, which pairs students in the class with a real local company in the Lehigh Valley and ask the students to use their knowledge and skills to communicate with the company, and research a problem that that company has and propose a solution for them, kind of actually going back and forth with that company. So that's very exciting. There's a lot of immediate application of research knowledge. And then finally, another of Mark's SCM courses assigned something called the innovation paper, which asks students to come up with a novel improvement to the supply chain, explore and develop that idea with research of what it is they want to do, how they might do it, and then create a paper that both pitches that improvement and realistically evaluates if it would actually be successful or doable right now or not. And if not, what kind of obstacles are in the way, what might have to change for them to be able to implement that change or that improvement. So for all of these assignments, we're always trying to keep updating them to make sure that they meet the goals of our project and that they help reduce anxiety around research, encourage students to explore the resources available to them, and help students to identify appropriate resources and foster that sense of being a curious, independent learner. Early in the semester, I visit the course for an information literacy session to introduce the guide, give students an opportunity to have some guided exploration, and really point them to the resources they're going to need for their first assignments, which are going to be those weekly papers. And again, those are kind of an introduction to the resources of the guide before they start getting into the heavier assignments. We modify that session and the guide itself to adjust to changes in the student body as we're made aware of them. For example, recently we discovered that we have a lot more IT, IST students who are taking the SCM courses and are kind of interested in the connection between those two fields. So we've started including more IT and IST focused resources into the guide so that those students can find the things that they're most interested in. We also make it very clear during the first information literacy session that we are actively looking for their honest feedback, including criticisms of the guide and suggestions for improvement and suggestions for new resources we could include. There is a link to an evaluation form right on the guide itself, or there should be. I haven't tested it lately, but I hope it's working. And throughout the semester, we do find that students are citing new resources that we can then build right back into the guide. In fact, I just got an email from Mark a day or two ago about some MIT resources on supply chain and freight transportation that a student found that we're going to put into the guide itself next time we update it. And these assignments often gently push students out of their comfort zones as well, all in the name of helping them to eventually get more comfortable with a variety of different professional resources and really learn to explore and evaluate resources and the skills involved with that while they're in this protected kind of sandbox of the course. For example, in the weekly papers, Mark monitors the sources students are citing each week. If everyone seems to be gravitating toward a specific source, for example, our students love supply chain brain for obvious reasons, he might temporarily ban that for the next couple weekly papers in order to force the class to explore a little bit further. We don't do this in like a punitive way. We don't tell them like this is not a good resource or something. We just try to discuss what it is that they like about that resource and help point out that there are other resources that fulfill that same need and might have other things they haven't looked at, and really point them to take a look at those too, that this is a chance for them to kind of survey what's out there and not just focus in on one thing so that they know what's available when they need it. Some of the weekly papers also give students a heads up that they're going to be required to cite an unusual resource, like a podcast, so they might have time to explore those unfamiliar options and see what it is they'd like to use. And in some years, after those podcast only weeks, we've surveyed students to get their thoughts on what it was like to use a non-text source and what worked for them, what didn't, how we can support their use of those kinds of sources more, because these are things that they're likely to be interacting with as professionals. And actually off of that, we found out last time we surveyed them after a podcast week that they really like podcasts that come with transcripts, which we wouldn't have thought. We thought they liked the podcast because they didn't have to read. But it turns out the majority of them really like to be able to read along while they listen. And they were very disappointed to find that a lot of podcasts don't have transcripts. But all these assignments really try to encourage students to explore and try out their skills without being worried about, unexpected failing grades and, attached to all these assignments. The weekly papers are very low stakes, and Mark grades them with an eye toward improvement and encouragement rather than like strict guidelines. And the longer term assignments have lots of scaffolding built in throughout. And they often require one-on-one or group consultations with me as their librarian to make sure that they're really thinking about the kind of information they need, especially for those company and innovation papers that are a little bit more complicated. And they're aware of where they can find the things that they want. So that is just a quick overview of the assignments that we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to go ahead now and hand it over to Mark to discuss the impact that the guide and its paired assignments seem to be having on our students so far.
Again, thank you, Elizabeth, very much for the introduction on the guide and all your great work in it. And again, everyone, thank you for joining us here today. I have a few comments on the few next slides. And I think the first one is this concept, which I consider very important, is being a curious learner. If I look back at myself many years ago as a college student, certainly we didn't have the capability of information as we have today. But I think more importantly, and coming from New York, we're very quick and to come to an answer. I love to say, don't let facts be in the way of a good story. So I think what we try to achieve here with the guide is to develop a baseline, information where the students can go to. As Elizabeth said, easy stakes on this. Course content is readily available. Information is there. I'm somewhat of a jazz fan. And what is jazz more than what key are we in? What are the chords? And then we find out, how we can interface or intersect with each other. And a guide provides some of that baseline information to do that. We're all on information overload. I looked today and I thought I counted 15 or 14 SCM news flashes or periodicals that I get. And in the experience that I have over 40 years in doing this, I can go through those quite readily and determine which one is valuable and which one is not valuable for me to read. My students don't have that filter. What the guide does is provide them a place where they can go to, they can find some answers. And to Elizabeth's earlier point, we can also find where they're looking too much at one particular area, and also they look for it themselves. So give them the confidence to look for research as well. Applying research to their own thoughts and discussions. Elizabeth shared some of that, and I'll get into a little more detail later. However, again, reinforcing that research is a cornerstone of whatever they do. This course that we introduced this guide to is what is called at Penn State the SCM 301 course. Many years ago, the gentleman who started the business logistics program at that time was able to convince the faculty leads that this course is so important that every major should take it. So I have finance majors, I have technology majors, as was mentioned, I have marketing majors, all in one course. And from that course, we're trying to create an intersection of how supply chain works with one another throughout that. So this research guide helps that as we move forward. We also focus on career skills in the guide, as was mentioned. There's repositories on how to ascertain the salary for a particular position. When I talk about the pre-assignment in a few moments, we'll get in more detail to that. And because the guide is available, most of the content for our graduates, the graduates also use that as they're making their second step after their entry-level positions. So they can use a guide for that as well. Getting guides, getting students familiar with professional organizations. Fortunately, in the Lehigh Valley, we have a lot of the national and global SCM and PM organizations, project management organizations. We encourage the students to be active with those, networking with those. I incent them with points if they go to some of these sessions. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, a lot of those organizations moved to a Zoom footing. We still encourage them to do that as well. Hone their interpersonal skills, looking for network opportunities. And then communicating the value of using these resources and preparing for interviews. Again, we have a fine career group in our campus, which of course is their first place to go to. But we do discuss interviews in the classroom. We do discuss type of questions used, and we also grade each other on how we answered a particular question. Some of the secondary impact on students that we found was taking a gradual approach to some of the concept. As I mentioned, the SCM, or Supply Chain Management 301 course, is the precursor when you decide what your major is. As I mentioned, we have the finance students, we have other students in there. The launching pad, if you will, for SCM is this 301 class. So we introduced the research, as was mentioned earlier, in the weekly paper, and slowly in the other courses that we have, we include that as well. Be aware, though, one of the drivers of that weekly paper is what I found in a business setting, that students didn't communicate very effectively. And I did hire them, I apologize for that. But they didn't communicate very effectively in either written and presentations. So this weekly paper acts as a vehicle as well to reinforce their business writing skills and their presentation skills as we go forward. So it's an opportunity to do research and communicate as well. As Elizabeth mentioned, we continue to look for broader areas, be it webinars, podcasts, YouTube videos. We don't try to go right to it, for example, a Harvard Business Review. We find that's probably too in-depth, probably too detailed. We do move up the ladder a little bit in our major courses, but we make it accessible to the students at a level that they can understand and incorporate in their classwork as well. As I mentioned earlier, we need to be able to talk the talk. Every business, finance, marketing, a car dealership, I believe, has their own language. Students have to be able to talk the talk. And what reinforced that to me was about 2 years ago, when we were going through the interview discussions that some of the students have had. One of my students mentioned that a person asked her specifically a question and then would put a note on it saying that you need to discuss this using SCM terminology. And that was an eye-opener for me, and I struggled how I would do that myself. However, by discussing it with the other students, right, they're more prepared to do that. So we want to prepare them for situations as well. Also, again, getting them started with networking, keeping current in the field. I mentioned to go to local chapter meetings, to be very engaged with the organizations. And also we are very bullish on bringing in guest lecturers, people from B. Braun, Oracle, JB Hunt, other companies, that I'm able to recruit to come in. They might talk about a particular lesson I might be teaching that evening, or it might be about their career path or anything that they've found over time, and to reinforce again to the student that there's many ways. There's, it's a journey, it's a destination, and there's many ways, and all of these people share that as well. Students need to be able to stay current edge in discussions. And I'll give one example of that just came up last week. The President's 2022 economic report devoted a whole chapter in supply chain, and that came out on April 14th. The next class that we had, students were enlisted to look at that and make their own prediction, make their own views on the President's economic report on supply chain. Certainly a very topical field today, as everyone knows. So here, and this was a major class, because of the research, because of their baseline knowledge that they're building over course, they were able to have a very open discussion on what they believe would work, what they believe wouldn't work. And I will be using that in a subsequent evaluation and an exam. Those are the exact type of things that I look for and try to drive out of the student more information. I mentioned earlier this concept of the 301 course, and I have other majors, and Elizabeth mentioned how we are attracting, IT students, because for the most part, SCM and IT work very closely hand in hand as well. The students have to be aware to research in our field for our course, but this also enables them and gives them confidence to research in other fields. So it's not unbeknown that someone from another class required to do a paper, looking for something else, will come to me, certainly more so come to Elizabeth and say, how do I do this? What tools can I use? What tools that are in the guide now can I use to help me as well? Grow interest in research as a general business skill. And that's what I've tried to mention a few moments ago, that we're trying to have them fearless in finding research and collecting their thoughts and be able to communicate that effectively. The evidence of impact on the quality of students' work, it's to the point now, particularly with my majors, that they layer in more research areas than I even asked for. So I might ask a particular question on an exam, cite 3 research areas to support your answer, and it's 3, 4, 5, or 6 regularly. So they're doing exactly what the objective was. Cement their answer, right, with some facts, something that they can quantify, something that they can research, something that they can citate in terms of that. We all can look at that and we all can share that as well. As we move forward, as mentioned with the weekly paper, we do ratchet up the requirements. Every student comes to us at a different place. Some have excellent research skills, some don't necessarily do. So what we want to do is slowly dial it up in terms of the proper citations, the proper formatting as we move forward as well. Again, we mentioned of the podcast, B-logs, other things that we do to, again, to have the student develop their own knowledge base. And one thing I wanted to add on top of that, I do require a podcast maybe halfway through the session, the semester, I'm sorry. And I found that a lot of students, as I grade these weekly papers after that, for example, they do move to that. I was surprised to find a lot of students didn't even listen to podcasts. So it was a good way of their learning skills. We talk next about integrating with our, oh, I'm sorry.
Did I go too fast? Did you have something you wanted to finish with?
Oh, no. I skipped slides. I apologize.
Gotcha. No worries. So I'm just going to jump us back in with a few last thoughts before we get to our Q&A. Like I mentioned before, we also have had several opportunities to ask students about their thoughts on how our project impacted their learning. And we pulled some of their thoughts from surveys and oh my gosh, I can't remember the name of them, but end of course evaluations and things like that to share with you all. So as you can see highlighted, there are some common themes. Students are often expressing that they avoided, feared, or weren't aware of research skills or resources, but they now enjoy using them. And we recognize this is not a representative snapshot of all the students we've interacted with. These were just some comments that caught our eyes. They also mentioned that they feel the guide has made their research assignments easier, which is always good, but that they also mentioned that the guide introduced them to resources that will be useful in their careers as well as in their assignments. So we were really excited to see them reflecting on that. And then the last 2 quotes on here we thought were interesting for more specific reasons. The second to last quote, the second to last comment about Vault shows that our students are really happy to share their suggestions for improvement and other ways that the guide might be made useful for them, even if in this case, incorporating LinkedIn postings does present a little bit of a technological challenge for us, but it's something they want to have so we can look into it. And then the last comment shows that even our kind of I already know all this students still see the guide as a convenient way to access the resources, even if they don't feel it was really necessary for them as an introduction to what's out there. So really quickly, we just want to check in with our next steps with this project. We've been doing a lot of informal surveys and assessment, but we feel like we finally have this project to the point where it's almost done. At least it's not going to change a lot more. And it's ready for some more formal assessment. So we're planning on applying for IRB to do a formal survey of student perceptions of the guide and look at impact on how they perform on assignments, how their grades are on different things. And we would definitely be planning to publish on that if that works out. We're looking for ways that we can embed the guide more deeply into the assignments or create different assignments that might use the guide in different ways. We're also, like I think I mentioned this before, we're planning to build a similar guide for Mark's project management courses. But that also gives us a unique opportunity to ask those project management students to maybe contribute to this guide, the SCM guide or their project management guide, while exercising those project management skills, possibly as some kind of an open pedagogy project. So that's a little bit of like a pie in the sky. This would be a really cool thing that we're looking into. And finally, we're hoping to keep expanding our students' experiences with research by trying to identify those students in the course who really, or courses, who really dive into these assignments and make good use of the guide, and encourage them to think about undergraduate research experiences and projects within this field that they can do with Mark as a faculty mentor. So thanks everybody for listening. I know we went through this kind of quick, but that's everything we had prepared to share, and we would love to hear what you're thinking and any questions you have. I do have a couple questions written down that went by in the chat that we can get back to and provide more details on. But I also have our emails on this page, and I'm going to drop them into the chat as well. So that if you want to reach out to us outside of this or after the session, please feel free to do that. We'd be happy to talk about it. And before we jump into the Q&A, there's one other thing I want to mention before I forget. Let me pull the guide itself over to this window. At the bottom of the guide, you'll notice that we have an attribution statement. So the entire guide itself is actually an OER. It's licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. So if you are interested in this guide, if this seems like it would be a useful model for you, you are welcome to take whatever from this, copy it, and we can certainly help with that. I'm not 100% sure how we share Google Sites, but we can figure that out. You would just need to modify those library resources to be specific to your subscription links. But a lot of the resources on here are free for anyone online to use. So, so again, yeah, it's under an open license as well, if that's useful. Let me jump back into the presentation and see if we have anything in the Q&A. All right.
Thanks, Elizabeth and Mark. We have a couple more questions coming in. Dan is asking about the data that's in Mergent Online and what you found useful and helpful related to supply chain for your assignments.
Gotcha. I can definitely talk about that from the perspective of the database, and then Mark, if you want to weigh in on kind of how they use that. I know for Mergent Online and Mergent Intellect, we tend to use that a lot for that kind of gathering information about different companies piece. It's not necessarily going to answer their supply chain management questions, but it's helpful for when they just want to look into that basic information about a company, how it functions, who it works with, who works there, how much money it makes, that kind of stuff. If they need to be able to cite that, that's helpful for them. And it's helpful as well, since this is a foundational business course. Even if they don't wind up using it a huge amount in these assignments, they get introduced to it and they will use it a lot more in their other business courses.
Yes, and certainly, as we mentioned, we have a company project, which every student is encouraged to have internships throughout their supply chain college career, if you will. But we also, as I mentioned, go to companies like Rexroth and Olympus and JB Hunt and all the other companies in the Lehigh Valley. And this company project, and they're required to investigate their company. They might not know what they do, who their competitors are, where are they ranking in their business levels and what have you. And that's using the company project and other exercises that we have as well.
Thank you. Go ahead. Did you want to add to that, Elizabeth?
No, I was just going to say, should I jump up to there was a question during the presentation that I didn't answer.
Yes, Lenny had asked a question. The question is, amidst the library, was there any contention about you creating the Google site itself, or instead of the standard LibGuide? And I'm wondering, Lenny, are you asking about it being linked within the LibGuide itself?
Linked on the LibGuides page of the library website.
The library's LibGuide to your Google site.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So in terms of contention, no, I mean, the way the Penn State Library libraries work is what's our slogan? One library geographically dispersed. So each of our campus libraries is somewhat free to kind of address and support our classes in the ways that we want to, or the ways that are going to be most successful for our campuses. So we didn't have any problem with just like, oh, let's try this and see how it works. It does present some long-term technical issues in that it relies on me to be able to update it from the Google site. It's not in our shared LibGuides system, so our LibGuides oversight team can't be in charge of updating broken links. That's a little bit of additional work for me every summer to just check that those links are all working. But for me, I feel like that's worth it to make it easier for students to find it. But it's also something we might want to think about long-term about using this guides to help bridge students back into our LibGuide system as they get more familiar with stuff, maybe pulling it back in that way so it can be interlinked. And it does actually, we link to our like official Penn State LibGuides from our Google site. So they can get to them that way, but it doesn't, no one links to us. It's just within these specific courses.
So we have about 5 minutes left and there are lots of good questions. I'm getting questions in here and also people are private messaging me too. So let's see if I can sort of like collate the themes here. So I'm getting a couple of questions about the Google Sites itself. Is it ADA compliant? And if not, what are your workarounds?
That's a good question. I think I'm not 100% sure because I'm going to be honest, I struggle with some of the accessibility stuff for websites and figuring out how to do that. I have run it through, Google Sites has a built-in accessibility checker and I have run it through that. So at least in terms of like color schemes and how things are laid out and how a screen reader would read it, it should, if that's working correctly, it should work. But that is a good point. We should actually double check that and test it to make sure that it is actually working and that we don't have any weird things happening. But yeah, we've run it through that, but we haven't done any more significant accessibility testing with that.
Thank you for answering that. And some people, and myself included, are interested a little bit more in the background between your collaboration between both of you and how it came to be in the sense of your outreach, any tips you have about developing a collaboration between librarians and teaching faculty.
That comes down to Mark being game to do pretty much like me showing up and being like, do you want to try something new? And him being like, yeah, why not? Sure, it's extra work. That'll be fun.
Yes, I think it goes back to the curious learner. Again, I came to academia full-time 3 years ago, and I had a business hat on, and we look at things, I guess, in a business setting, look at it much differently. And I met Elizabeth early on, and I was overwhelmed with the capabilities of what she can bring, what the general concept of research, and how we can engage with students. I was able to have a very willing partner and someone who's, you know, we have things plotted out for next summer already now. So that's how far out we're looking already with it. So again, we're very blessed at Lehigh Valley. You know, both Elizabeth and the other team members there are very open to us. It's a campus of about 900 to 1,000 students. So big, but not too big, and it's very organic, and everyone learns from one another. And Elizabeth made comments on, you know, other faculty members doing what we're doing, and I'm doing something what another faculty member's doing. I don't know if I answered that effectively, but it's really it's a reach out by Elizabeth, and I was more than willing to participate.
And I have definitely used this example with many other faculty, sometimes in a nice, well, you always in a nice way, but also in kind of a look what Mark is doing don't look at the success we're having with this. Don't you want to try that? And that has actually gotten me in the door with a couple other faculty members who had been like, oh, this is too much work, and are now kind of looking at this and going, oh, okay, this is eventually going to make things easier. So it's going to be a lot of work up front, and then it will make things run more smoothly. And I think that piece we keep coming back to of like that curious learner, getting students to stop checklisting their assignments and like grocery listing their sources, and actually thinking about what they want to learn and what they're learning, and not just getting 5 sources because you tell them they have to. That's so impactful for them and for us. So that makes all this worth it.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. I think we're just going to wrap up right now. We're at quarter till the next presentation. So I want to thank you, and we've gotten a lot of great questions. And again, if your question wasn't addressed in this Q&A, please reach out to Mark and Elizabeth for follow-up. And yes, agreed. People are saying it was just great to see your collaboration and the success that you have achieved together. So it's very inspiring. And so